Okay, welcome to the Cutting Edge with Dr. Lee Pierson and Dr. Bob Stubberfield. Today, we're going to discuss the will to perceive and subtitle Vision and Volition. And Bob is going to start us off with the motivation for this session. So I'll hand that over to Bob.
Thank you. I wanted to go first so I'd have a chance to say at least something.
Good points.
I watched you and Harry on your thing about whether or not there's an integrative mechanism.
Yes, yeah, which is.
I noticed that the best chance that Harry got to speak was when your connection went down.
Well, I'll try not to make that happen here. But go ahead, Bob.
So what I'm going to say is a little bit at odds with the title. What motivated me to want to talk about this was I understood at one time that Lee Pierson was of the view that animals have volition. Not just man, the animal, but other. And I take great exception to that. And so I thought we would, after talk with him on other things, I'm not sure we have as great a disagreement as I thought, but I think it's worth making whatever our agreements and disagreements are on that explicit. So before starting into that topic, I thought we would see a few things that I'm sure we agree on from Ayn Rand's theory of epistemology. And that is, we both accept her theory of concepts. And a nod is okay, Lee. And that knowledge is not inborn. We start tabula rasa. There's nothing known until you have some experience. Okay.
I'll buy that too, I think.
Oh.
I think that's right.
And that not all of our knowledge is conceptual. There is such a thing as perceptual knowledge, and we would agree that animals have such. And we, as humans, have such. And the third point that I think is going to be very relevant in more discussion is that knowledge is hierarchical. That is, that there are some things that you can't really know unless you know other things first. Now, you might want to state that some other way, but that's what I would like to start with. Another sort of distinction I think we should make is the difference between concepts of consciousness and concepts of the physical world. And an important fact about the difference between those is that a concept of consciousness must, at its root, have introspection, whereas any concept of the physical world, at its root, must have observation. So we're together on that? Okay. And
I like it.
I think it's important for us to not equivocate between one and the other. For example, sometimes when discussing the subconscious, some people might use the word brain or the neural network. But wait, subconscious is a concept of consciousness, whereas brain and neural network are concepts of the physical world. So that's why I think it's going to be relevant as we continue discussing. Let's see. Okay, so I think now we're ready to say.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that last point, but we'll get to it when we get to it.
Okay. But now I think we're at the crux of the matter. We can ask, does a perceptual consciousness, like mammals, animals, have volition? And my answer is no. And what's your answer?
Are we going over to me now?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Before I answer that question, let me just say a few other things quickly. I'll try to make it brief. You know, the way that this issue comes up for me is that I and my colleague Monroe Trout wrote a paper I've referred to in various other talks called "What is Consciousness For?" which is in New Ideas in Psychology of January 2017. Anyway, our main contention there was that volition, in some sense of the term, volition is the sole causal efficacy of consciousness and is ultimately about the flexible volitional control of movement, of action. That's what it's about. But here, the most important thing is that we regard it as the sole causal efficacy, and therefore, as an implication, that if something has consciousness, it would, if it didn't have volition, it would be a couch potato. You'd be sitting there watching your consciousness TV, or however you want to put it, perhaps less representationally, but you're watching TV and you can't do anything about it, and that would be horrible and useless. We think that consciousness, that the causal efficacy is bound up in volition. Now that has run into various objections. One of the objections, I'll just list them briefly. I think what Bob's talking about will be centered on one of them. One objection is that in the activity of a perceptual entity, of a perceptual level entity, volition can't help that entity. Now that I think is a mistake because of a misunderstanding of perception as a completely automatic process that occurs in a short amount of time, as opposed to a self-generated process that occurs over time, as has been advocated by my mentor, James Gibson. And I think that's right. And if you understand that objection, I believe, goes away. Another objection, natural one, is that consciousness is involved in other things besides volition, that there are other causal efficacies of conscious experience. For example, things have been brought up like memory. Doesn't something have to enter consciousness in order to be then laid down as a memory? You have to have the experience in consciousness first. And I say no to that. I say consciousness, neural processes primarily, let me simplify it anyway, just say neural processes cause consciousness. Consciousness does not cause neural processes. So it's there's a kind of a last step, consciousness. And I say the same neural processes that produce consciousness are also involved in laying down the memory and don't require any consciousness to do so. So I don't regard that objection, obviously that needs more unpacking, and I've done it in some other talks. But anyway, that's the basic idea, that I don't think that's true, that conscious experience is required for any kind of automatic action, basically. Does not require conscious experience. Conscious experience, however, is not epiphenomenal. It's not useless. It is very important in the guidance of volitional action. It's important for that reason. Now, then, the third point is that the third objection is that volition is only a conceptual level phenomenon. That's the context in which we learn it, and that's all there is. Volition is essentially, by definition, about bringing yourself to the conceptual level. I think Bob's objection is somewhere in that category, but we'll have to explore that further. And there, I would say, my answer. This comes to my answer to what Bob is saying, is that I never said, and neither I nor my colleague or in our paper or anywhere else have said, that when I'm talking about volition in animals, let's say, perception, or forget the animals, because the same thing occurs in people. And I like to start with our own experience. That's the real starting point. And we all have the experience of directing our perceptual attention. When we look around, when we walk around an object, when we pick up something like a pen, and I'm here appealing to touch as well as vision, because I think it's very clear. You can see the importance of self-generated action. When you roll the pen, you get a a better perceptual impression of what a pen is, a much better one, by self-generated action. So the intentional, volitional, I'll use the word volitional for the moment here, chosen activities are, I think, extremely evident in perceptual and introspectively in perceptual activity, even in our own introspection. So I don't, we can go to the animals because it is an implication of this theory that animals would have it too. But I have to say we know a lot more about our own cases. It's hard to introspect on animals. So it's hard to get them to tell us it much because they can't introspect. So that's the sense in which we think there's volition. I don't think we don't think it's the same thing. The direction, the basic idea is that volition, fundamentally, the introspective indicator of volition is the mental effort of directing attention. That's what the basic introspection is, and that cuts across both anything conceptual and perceptual. And that's why I might use I want to have some kind of terminology that covers both, because that's the fundamental phenomenon as we see it introspectively. Now, I don't insist that we use the same word. If I could be, I think Bob wants to argue that volition should be, the term volition should be restricted to the conceptual level because there are sufficient differences there to make it requirement to have its own term. And I'm okay with that, as long as that is not used as an excuse. Bob has not done this yet. As long as that's not used as an excuse to define away the perceptual level phenomenon of directing attention, which definitely exists. There's an error here, which I like to call exclusion by definition, where you say, okay, volition is raising your awareness to the conceptual level, and then that just excludes the existence of some kind of choice at a lower level. But you can't do that. That lower level choice does exist. Sometimes I use the term proto-volition for that. I'm open to other suggestions. But what I insist on is that it's a real phenomenon and that it accounts for the causal efficacy of perception at that level, which occurs both in humans and animals. Now, I guess I could say I can keep on talking, but I better let Bob back in. I think I've given him enough rope that he can try to hang me with.
So let's talk about animals for a second, or perceptual level knowledge, which also we humans have. And that is, there's a difference between perceptual knowledge and conceptual knowledge. Perceptual knowledge consists of perceptions plus associations of perceptions. It's clear that animals have such associations. Otherwise, you could never train them. It's clear that animals, in some sense, make a choice. Your cat might want to go outside, and you open the sliding door, and the cat sticks its paw out, finds it's raining, and comes back in. And a second later, it wants to go out again. It chooses one or the other. Our dog makes choices all the time about, geez, out there I see somebody walking, and they've got a dog with them, and my territory. These are words that I'm putting in Lexi's mouth. It's not her. She doesn't tell me this clearly, and she says, "I got to protect my territory. He's got a dog, and I'm going to bark, and nobody else in the house can hear anything because of my barking." And then, of course, the dog might make a mistake. Hey, that was just a jogger. There's no pit there. And you can shout at the dog all you want, but she'll continue barking until the jogger gets out of the line of vision. So that brings up the issue of it's possible for perceptual knowledge to be mistaken. Okay, so that's now let's contrast the perceptual knowledge, the little I've said about it so far, with what we know about conceptual knowledge. The difference between a concept and perceptual knowledge is that one has organized the associations and percepts that one has experienced. A concept is a specific type of organization of that. And I've seen no evidence at all for non-humans to be able to have any conceptual knowledge. Everything that I've seen, including all those ape chimpanzee studies, etc., are easily explained, or sometimes a little more difficultly explained, with associations, preferences because of associations, not because any associations have been organized into concepts. So are you with me so far?
In large part, I don't like the term association for what animals have in addition to perception. I think it's a bad term.
Well, let me point out.
I don't think it properly describes, but let me let you go ahead and I'll come back to that. But other than that, I'm with you. Yeah.
But it certainly has meaning to you. And the reason I like to use association is because it is different from what you experience for physical concepts. What you see out in reality are relationships. And you could loosely call them association, but I would like to precisely discriminate. An association is something that perceptual consciousness does, and a relation is something that is out there in the reality, which may or may not be observed by a consciousness.
But can be observed.
Yes.
You're not going to say that it's impossible to perceive a relationship, I hope.
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not. So where was I going with this? Oh. Okay, so humans also make associations, and we have the ability, which we have because of volition, not only to choose among different associations, but also to choose to organize associations. In other words, volition gives us the ability to form concepts. So what I'm arguing here is that, let's be precise about volition. Volition, if it exists, means we need a theory of ethics, good and bad, shoulds, should not. And without volition, you don't need that. And we don't use ethics for animals. We might be ethical about animals, but animals have no ethics. And yet, we as humans make associational-like choices. In fact, when Sam Harris tries to tell us what volition is, he winds up talking only about choices that are made by associations. Things that are in your memory, you have these now, and it's clear that because you have these memories, you have these values, you're going to make that. In other words, it's necessitated that you make this choice, and that's what he claims is volition. I'm saying, no, I agree that's a choice, but it's the same choice that animals have. It is a choice among associations, and the animal has no volitional ability to focus on something other than the associations that it has in its mental consciousness at the time. So the controversial statement that I think I'm making is that volition and choice are not synonymous. Choice refers to perceptual level issues. Volition is at the root of all conceptual level issues. So is that controversial enough?
Well, I actually agree with it that mostly. My main problem is with all this talk about association, which I think is a description of what perceptual consciousness is about. It comes from the British empiricists, and it's just wrong. The better, let me put it this way. You talked about organization and the fact that conceptual organization, we are able to organize things conceptually, that the animals can't do that. That's true. But there is organization in the structure of the world already there. There is an organization. The world does not consist of a bunch of meaningless, uncausally connected associations. The world itself is organized by causes, if nothing else. And a perception is the activity of detecting the organization that's there. And that is completely wrong, I think, to think of a perception as essentially an associative process, or even whatever, if it's a perceptual level, it's wrong. I think perception is detection of an organization that already exists. But what we can do conceptually is we can reorganize it or organize it in ways that the world does not come in, directly come in. We can organize it like shuffling cards. We can change things around, and the animals can't do that, or as far as I know, at least in general, they can't do that. So I wouldn't put it in terms of association.
But it sounds to me,
and I still say, so I guess let me pose the question before you. Let me pose the question. You say there's volition and choice, which I'm okay with, but do you think the choice is? Do you think that when you say choice, are you actually mean choice, or do you mean a deterministic process? Because if you mean a deterministic process, I don't think there is any evidence that animals are run by deterministic processes. I don't think that's in the cards, and I don't believe it's true. But so if you really are serious about choice, I'm okay with it as being different from volition, because volition, in the full conceptual sense, enables us to reorganize what we see perceptually into categories that are not out there in the world. They're our own construction based on features of the world, but the world isn't that way. So that's fine. But I think, again, perception is the detection of existing structure. And that detection is not an automatic process. You have to go, it's an achievement. You go out and get it. You get the information in the structure of the light. You would get that by self-generated action. You know the famous experiments with the cats, Harry's mentor at MIT, where you have they're in the carousel and they're going around, and one of them is active and one of them is passive. And the active cat learns to perceive and the passive cat doesn't. Self-generated action is crucial in perception, and it's easy to forget that. I'll stop there. I could keep going, but stop there. Go ahead, Bob. So what about that? Is you saying perception is deterministic?
Did I?
I'm asking, actually. No, you didn't.
No.
Yeah. So I'm asking. Because if you're not, we're pretty much good, I think.
Should I interrupt with a question we have here?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Okay. How do we know how animals think compared to humans?
Very
Brain
good.
structure? Sorry, there's two questions. How do we know how animals think? Question. Compared to humans? Question. Brain structure? Question. Animal behavioral studies? Question. So there's four.
Okay. You want to go first, or should I?
Well, how does one know anything, right? You got to start with some observations. So how do you know how you think? Okay, we started off with that introspection, right? How do I know that you think the same way as I know that I think? Well, I can't introspect for you. I have to generalize from all the things that I know that prove that I think. And I see that you do a lot of those same things, and I conclude that you also think. Okay, so now we want to know about animals. Well, I know that animals don't think the way we do by looking and observing that they're vastly different. There's some similarities. Maybe barking is like language, but barking is not language. So one thing I can think about is something that is very high on Lee's scale of values, and that is evolution. And that is that, well, certainly in the scheme of things, animals evolved before humans. Particular other types of animals evolved before humans evolved from animals. So it's quite likely that just as there are vestiges of animal things in me with respect to physical things, that there's something like that with respect to conscious things. So I might ask myself, now, what would I be like if I didn't have language? You know, what would I be like if I didn't have concepts? And I could still make choices among things, and I can say, aha, that must be what animals are like. So do you want to continue?
That's pretty, I like that. I like, especially glad you brought in evolution because, and I'll just make that point and then I'll come back to the question. If you look at human nature from an evolutionary perspective, which I think is essential to do that, you have to realize that complex adaptations, such as volition, consciousness and volition, did not arise from the forehead of Zeus, all at once. It doesn't work that way. They arise in a series of steps over a long time. So it is perfectly reasonable to think that there are some earlier forms of, again, I'm going to use the term proto-volition. I don't care what word you use for it, of something that evolved into the full form of volition that we humans have. And it's the same thing as with eyes.
If you really don't care, why don't you use choice?
I could use choice because all I really care about in myself in this is that it doesn't get defined away, that we don't end up with this picture of perceptual activity as entirely automatic and deterministic, which is what I'm afraid many people have that view, and it's just wrong. That's not correct. As long as we don't have that view, what word you use to describe it, I'm not invested in it one way or the other. I do think there's an important similarity between perceptual choice and conceptual choice, in that they both involve, I'm talking introspectively, the direction of mentally effortful direction of attention. Both of them involve that. If you want brilliant introspection of that, you go to William James's discussion of this and talks to teachers. It's utterly brilliant about how that works. And so I introspectively, that's where I'd start. So my first answer to the question about animals is, don't start there. Start with humans first, and do the best you can with your introspective analysis of humans, and see that there is a kind of perceptual choice there. And once you get that, then you can go to the animal case. And I have to say that we don't know that much. Even the experts don't know that much about animal behavior, and certainly people, in general, know very little. What I can say without, I actually ran an animal lab when I was a graduate student for a while, but I don't think I learned much from that. I learned a lot from having dogs. And I'm not going to go relate my experience with. Now, maybe I should. Now, I'll just say that if you look at dogs, you get a strong impression that they're not just little stimulus response machines that are acting automatically, but they actually do something that's like direction of their attention that affects their behavior. But of course, it's hard to know for sure. I don't claim that we know for sure what's going on in animal consciousness. I don't even claim that our basic contention about consciousness has been utterly proven. It happens to be in my opinion, the only decent hypothesis in town, in my opinion, but I don't consider it utterly proven. So, there's a great limit to what you can learn. And as we study animal behavior further, we will learn further things. I don't think we're going to learn that they're like behavioristic stimulus response machines. I don't think that's the way it's going to turn out. And it doesn't look that way. But anyway, start with humans. I guess I'll leave it with that. Unless Steve, you want to?
I got a question here from Stephanie Bond. It's sort of relate to what. So she says, rather than proto-volition, how about decision-making capacity? Do animals have a primitive decision-making capacity? Or
I say, why go to 3 words when one will do one that we all are familiar with already, and that word is choice. The only reason for avoiding that is that for ages, people have taken choice to be synonymous with volition. And yet, if we look inside ourselves, we look at people who've even spent, major efforts and written books about it, and they talk about this thing called choice without ever getting to what we objectives know as volition.
Yeah, I think decision making, it's a little, it strikes me as being too abstract to describe the phenomenon, which is much more basic, of just directing your attention. And so I would prefer a term like a simpler description like choice. Decision making sound, there's a whole theory of decision making. I'm inclined to think of decision making as being as we generally think of it, as a conceptual level activity. There's a whole theory of that. But again, in the end, I don't care as much maybe as Bob does, as long as we recognize the existence of a choice phenomenon that is not the same as the volitional choice at the conceptual level. As long as we recognize that exists, I think I'm okay with it. But I don't. The
reason I care is because I'm very serious about objectivist epistemology and how one comes to know something. Introspect for a little bit, how you came to know the word choice. Is that something that you learned very early in your life, as opposed to decision-making capability? So I'm saying,
I think that I learned about choice before I learned the word.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I made choices. You learn choices by making them.
Yes.
And you don't have the word at that point. And at some point, you start getting the language for it. But you have a knowledge of it, which I don't know. See, is that conceptual knowledge? Not really. It is. I think
implicit.
Ayn Rand would describe that as implicit.
Yes.
Before you get to that point, but definitely, I think. Well, I don't even know if this is introspective. I just think it had to be that way. I know I made choices throughout my life. Starting, I don't know exactly when it started. I can't say. I can't remember back that far to be sure. But at some point, I started making choices, and I learned about choice by making it. That's how you know. So there's no problem. And by the way, that would cover both what I'm calling the perceptual level stuff and the conceptual. Yes. That's a later division.
Yes.
The first thing I think you become aware of is that you make a choice. And I also would say, introspectively, you become aware of mental effort. As that you make a mental effort to keep something, to retain something in mind in your consciousness that would otherwise go away. That takes mental effort, and I think we learned that early. I suspect.
Yeah, I think so as well. It is something that is present earlier, and you may not focus on it earlier, but if somebody points it out to you, you'll say, "Oh yeah, that's right." So
let me just
that would qualify as implicit knowledge.
How that kind of activity is different from the automatic activities, which also occur in perception. There's something called the cocktail party phenomenon. Actually, there are two very different things that are called the cocktail party phenomenon in the psychological literature. There are two different things. One of them is that you can you go to the cocktail party and people are talking all over the place and they're talking about all kinds of different things and they're all over the room talking about stuff and it's a cacophony. It is possible by mental effort to attend to one stream, one conversation. I can try to listen to what Bob's saying to Harry, they're plotting against, anyway, there's something going on there. And I can listen to that and pick out that stream amongst the all the other stuff. And that's very much intentional. And I was going to use the word volitional, but let's say is choice involved. There's a choice involved. The other cocktail party phenomena is, for example, if your name is, somebody says your name out there in that cacophony, that attracts your attention automatically. No volition or choice involved. You'll listen to that because you're set to listen to that. Or if there's a loud, somebody drops a drink and the glass explodes and makes a loud noise, that will get your attention. So those are two different phenomena, and that are both called cocktail party phenomena. But the one is an illustration of the existence of choice.
Yes.
At a perception, and the other one is also acknowledges that there are automatic processes.
Yes,
which there are, and there are automatic processes in conceptual thinking too. There's a distinction, and I think that distinction holds for both kinds of awareness.
I agree.
So I think we agree pretty much. I mean, because I'm not disputing that the conceptual, whatever we're going to call it, is very different. One of the things I think accounts for the difference, may not be the only thing, is introspective awareness. I think that's what allows us to deploy our attention internally on the contents of consciousness, whereas in animals are really they can't do that. They can only deploy it. I think, by the way, I don't know that this is true, but I think it's true. They can only deploy their attention, as it were, externally to objects, to perceptual objects. We can deploy our attention to things that are phenomena of consciousness, and that's a very important in being able to form concepts. So that's the big difference, but it's still the intentional, volitional, whatever the right word is, deployment of attention by mental effort, direction of attention by mental effort. It is in both those cases. So there is a certain similarity as well. And as well, we should expect it to be, because again, volition, like every other human faculty, is an evolved phenomenon. It evolved. There had to have gone through some stages to get where it is. It could. It's very unlikely that it just came up out of nothing. I do not know. Just like the eye, there are more primitive forms of eyes. The eye is what used to be the favorite example of creationists, but it's explained very well by Dawkins and others as a succession, a bunch of successive approximations that occurred over a long evolutionary history. Same thing with volition choice.
Let's get back to why you hear or disagree with some people who want to say that volition or choice is not involved with animals. And that is that although you believe that some choices are automatic, you do not believe that is synonymous with determinism. No,
I don't think there are. I think you shouldn't use the word choice for automatic stuff. That's not a choice. If it's done automatically, it's a necessity rather than a choice. So I would not say some choices are automatic. I think that's a contradiction in terms.
Hey, Bob,
well,
can I ask?
Go ahead.
Can I ask you a question? Your view on human knowledge. Do you think that human perception, broadly speaking, is automatic?
Perception, yes.
Okay. That's a highly, that's.
It's automatic and it's not automatic. That is, given that your eye is here and you're focused on that, then that's what you're going to see. So it's automatic in the sense, in in our standard thing is that there's no such thing as invalidity of the senses. So that's the
Yeah, but
issue.
you can
That's the
you can
respect.
carve off some automatic aspects of perception, but that's not taking the whole process into account, the whole activity. The entire activity of perception involves choice, the non-automatic, non-deterministic choice of what to look at, what to pick up, how to move it around. I do this intentionally. I do this with intention. I don't do it with just sitting there as some automatic robotic process. So yeah, you can say there are certain processes of perception. The neurophysiological stuff is automatic. Well, hey, guess what? That's also true in concepts. You can carve off some neurophysiology and concepts that is entirely automatic as well. But you can't say the entire process, the entire activity of perception, or you shouldn't. It's a mistake to say that the entire activity of perception is automatic like that. It isn't. It's not true.
Yeah, it's really a loaded question as to what you mean by that.
Yeah, I know. I didn't mean to set you up. I was just getting a general.
Oh, set him up. Hey, you set him up.
But another term that is often used is mechanistic. And that one you want to avoid. Mechanistic drops not only consciousness, but even drops life from the equation. And,
yeah, mechanistic is totally wrong. For any kind of consciousness, perceptual, conceptual, whatever you want to call it. It's
right. That goes against what I started at the very start. There are concepts of consciousness and there are concepts of physical reality. And don't conflate them.
Yeah, but I would also get rid of deterministic too.
Well, that's why
when referring to any form of cognition, actually, I'd get rid of deterministic. I don't think it applies. We don't have any real reason to believe that animals are deterministic. There's no real evidence of that. Let me just say one more thing about that. Determinism, I think, where we get evidence of determinism is from our activities, our actions with respect to inanimate entities like stones and rocks and stuff like that, where we get physics from. That's where the evidence for determinism. It doesn't come from animate things that are conscious. So I don't believe it, and I don't believe that is consistent with what I know about perception as a self-generated, as crucially involving self-generated activity.
And yet, automatic does sometimes apply.
Yeah, it applies. Sometimes applies to all levels. Some conceptual activity is automatic. When you've automatized, if you look at something and you classify it under a heading that you've already got, there's an automatic processes. There are automatic processes involved. Not everything in conceptualization is volitional either. There are things get automatized. So when you learn, when somebody brought up getting a joke as a problem for saying that there are that all automatic processes don't require consciousness. That getting a joke would require consciousness. No, I think if it was some kind of jokes would not require, would be gotten totally in an automatic way. If there's something new about it, then it would require consciousness and it would require volition. So yes, there are both automatic and non-automatic processes in both perceptual and conceptual activity, in both. But what I object to is the idea that perception is an entirely automatic, and usually it's thrown in deterministic. Although I don't know what it would mean to be automatic if it weren't deterministic. Not sure what that would mean. But anyway, I object to applying those terms to perception. It's just wrong. It doesn't describe what we know.
What automatic means with respect to perception.
I think generally automatic. What does automatic mean? That's a good question. For one thing, I think it means without, no, that's my view. It means without the intervention of consciousness. Somebody might have a view that I think other people view consciousness, automatic processes could be conscious. So I guess automatic is defined in contradistinction to, if I may use a word here, volitional or choosable is defined in contradistinction to that. It's one of those kinds of concepts that doesn't exist on its own. It's like bald or dead. You have to have hairy and living in order to have bald and dead. So I think it's something like that. But I'm talking off the top of my head here on that. We might want to think about that some more. But I think that's where automatic comes from.
So what is
any other questions?
What how do you view, not that I necessarily want to view or talk about animals, but but Bob has put us there. So how do you see the bird flying into glass? Is that
well, now we're bringing up that issue of error.
Yes.
Which is a different, I mean, it's related. All these things are related. I think the desire to reduce perception to an automatic process has a philosophical motivation. It has to being connected to what is now some people like Harry call inerrancy, the inerrancy of perception. Now, by the way, Ayn Rand, as far as I know, Ayn Rand never used the term inerrant. She used the term valid with respect to perception. And that's the term I would use. Inerrant, I think, is a very misleading term because, as Harry puts it, for example, rainfall is inerrant. Well, rainfall is not a cognitive phenomenon, whereas perception is. So I think it's very misleading to use that term inerrant perception because it puts it in a category with other phenomena like rainfall that are not cognitive phenomena. Perception is valid, not inerrant. Now,
let's use the word infallible. Would you apply the word infallible?
There's something infallible. Now, this is a whole other subject. I wasn't. But
it's very close to get,
but it is related. So it's perfectly legitimate to bring it up. But it's a whole big, can of worms. What exactly is infallible? In my view, I'll just state it briefly, and then we can, I don't know where we go from there. In my view, what's infallible in perception is the informational basis, let's say in vision, which is in the structure of light. The structure of light is structured in a certain way, and that is the way it is by causality. And that is, you could say, infallible because it's related to the world in a certain way. Now, is our awareness infallible when we get it? Not necessarily.
Yeah, infallibility has to be a concept of consciousness, not a concept of physical thing.
Well, we're back to that, which is a good thing. I might want to go back to that discussion of the subconscious and why that's is that a concept of consciousness? I'm not sure that it is. I think that's one of the problems with the word subconscious, which as you know, I'm not a big fan of the word subconscious. As I don't know what to replace it with, and I use it myself. I definitely use it myself because it's useful, but it's a little misleading because subconscious suggests the existence of something that is like consciousness, except that it's not conscious. Slightly below, a place where like concepts or emotions or other conscious experiences that can go to, they can leave consciousness, but still be around, still hang around as ghosts somewhere. Well, I don't believe there's any such place. There's no such place.
Let's pursue this just a little bit, Pete.
Yeah.
Is memory a concept of consciousness?
If you mean by memory, the conscious experience of something as William James defined it, by the way, which is a good definition, the conscious experience of something with the additional awareness that you had been aware of it before. There may be a little more to it, but that's pretty good. If you mean by that, yes. But if you mean by it the way in which that is instantiated in the brain,
no, that's the concept.
I would say no, that's not a concept of consciousness. But we do talk about memory in that sense, that we do use the word in that sense. So the word can be used in more than one sense. In the first sense, yes. In the second sense, what's instantiated in the brain is a physical potential for recreating the experience. It's not the experience. There is no storehouse of concepts anywhere. There's no place where concepts or percepts or emotions are filed and kept out of consciousness, and then they get back in. What's stored, and even the word storage is really not the right word, but we don't have the right words for these things, do we? What's stored in the brain is the physical potential for recreating those things. And that's not a concept of consciousness. So when people talk about the subconscious, they are usually referring to the brain stuff. And so that stuff is not a concept of consciousness. Well, concepts of consciousness are about consciousness. That's what they're about. So yes. When you have a memory, when you have a conscious experience, while you're having that conscious experience, and you call that a memory, that is a concept of consciousness. When it goes out of consciousness, we're not talking about a concept of consciousness anymore.
And that's what I'm trying to argue against, is that people should not, or rather, let's put it positive, they should pay attention to what they are referring to. Are they referring to a conscious concept, or are they referring to something in reality? Out there in reality, out there as opposed to in here.
Okay, well, maybe I'll in this case, because we're talking about the brain, I think we can talk about it being physical. I think we could do that. And my point would be, there is no subconscious in the sense of a place. No, in the sense of a place where phenomena of consciousness go and just exist as ghosts to be brought back into consciousness. Instead of that, there is the physical potential. That's all there is. That's all. Once something goes out of consciousness, all there is that remains of it is the physical potential to recreate it. That's all that remains. So there's
what I would say is that if you use subconscious with that sort of sense, you're reifying something that is not real.
Okay, so don't use the term subconscious, because there's no such thing.
Why?
There's no such thing other than the physical,
thing out in reality,
the physical stuff in the brain.
Here.
Yeah, and when it's conscious.
Yes.
When it's conscious. But when it goes out of consciousness,
so why
it doesn't exist anymore as a phenomenon of consciousness. It no longer exists as a phenomenon of consciousness. It only exists as the physical potential for recreating that phenomenon of consciousness.
See, I think you're confusing the two things.
No, I'm distinguishing the two things.
When I use the word subconscious, I'm referring only to issues where it's related to consciousness, not anything about
well, give me an
process that implements it.
Give me an example, if you would, please.
Memory is an aspect of subconscious. What you remember.
Wait a minute. When you're remembering it, let's be clear. While you're remembering it in your consciously,
why?
Yes, it's a phenomenon.
Why is that important? How about thought? Is thought an issue of consciousness?
If you are conscious of it, yes. But if it goes out of consciousness, there are no subconscious thoughts. There's no such thing as a subconscious thought. What there is instead is the potential, presumably in the neurology, which we have some but not enough understanding of. There are some brilliant guys working on it, like Eric Kandel.
You're wiping out the whole theory of epistemology.
No,
you're saying that because there's nothing in reality that is a thought, unless something in reality is thinking it, that I can't abstract and talk about thoughts.
Of course you can abstract and talk about thoughts.
And that is a concept of consciousness that I'm talking about.
But you can talk about them because they are phenomena of consciousness. That's why you can talk about them. You can talk about things. It's perfectly permissible to talk about things that don't exist at a particular moment. I can talk about my thoughts my thoughts yesterday, and they don't exist anymore. Those thoughts no longer exist as thoughts. They simply don't exist as thoughts anymore. But I can talk about that, and there's no contradiction, and there's no problem, and it's perfectly consistent with epistemology to do so. There's no issue. They still exist in the sense of a physical potential, but that's a very different sense. But again, I'll insist, I will say, there is not the slightest reason to believe that there's some place anywhere in your head, in the world, or in heaven, where where what was formerly your former thoughts go to and remain as thoughts, like ghostly thoughts in some other dimension or something. There's no reason to believe in that. When the thought leaves your mind, it doesn't exist anymore as a phenomenon of consciousness. It no longer exists as a phenomenon of consciousness. At that, after that point, it may again.
And therefore, thinking does not exist.
No, thinking, of course, exists because, of course,
therefore the subconscious does not exist.
Well, again, I don't like the word, but the subconscious is essentially a subset of the brain.
No. Brain is physical.
That's why I say there's no subconscious in the sense of a storehouse of concepts or percepts or emotions. There's no such place.
There's no necessity to believe that. I mean, you can use subconscious as a perfectly valid concept to name phenomena that you examine and learn about by looking at consciousness, by introspection.
Yeah, but the phenomena I learn about it, they're in consciousness, I'm conscious of. Those are consciousness. There is no subconscious ideas. There are no subconscious thoughts. There are no subconscious perceptions. Those things, they simply don't exist. What exists when something goes out of conscious? I'm just repeating myself, so I better stop. There's no such place. There is no such place. There is consciousness. There is no subconsciousness. There's consciousness, but there's no subconsciousness.
There's a fine line in staying away from representationalism. I think that's what Lee is he's pushing back.
Well, I haven't. That's true. I'm not in this connection. I'm not so worried about that in this connection. I think what I'm worried about is in fact what Bob referred to earlier is reification, the reifying the existence of something that doesn't exist. Actually, the existence of a subconsciousness, of a different kind of let me go this way, of a different, the only non-material existent that I know of in the universe. I know of only one non-material existence I have knowledge of. It's called consciousness. There is no non-material subconsciousness. There's no reason to believe in such. Rather, what happens when an idea leaves consciousness, what the trace of it, as they say in psychology, the trace is in the brain. It's a physical thing, and it isn't a concept. It is the physical potential for recreating the concept, which can happen later. You can recreate your experience, and that would be a memory in that case. But there is no subconsciousness, no non-material existent. The only non-material existent that I have evidence for is consciousness. How about that? How about putting it that way? Maybe that's helpful. I don't know.
So abstractions do not exist.
Sure, when you're thinking about them, and they exist as a potential. They have potential when they're material things in the brain, but they're only potential then. So it's a distinction between potential and actual. Of course, abstractions exist. I use them myself occasionally.
So we're coming up on we are coming up on the hour, and we're scheduled in Clubhouse. So if you guys want to round up final thoughts.
I've said what I need. So if Bob wants to have the last word, I am happy with that.
There was one thought that I had that we haven't gotten close to. Well, maybe.
Oh, okay. So we can do that in Clubhouse. What is it?
And that is that there's a sense in which all of the compatibilists and determinists are really using free will as a floating abstraction or possibly they're using it as a frozen abstraction. Frozen being the degree of what they've learned about choice minus what objectivists know about choice, and that is volition. So I think it might be fun to accuse some of them of floating.
Yeah, that sounds right, except I'm getting this slight vibe that you're going to say choice is compatible with compatibilism. Choice in animals is compatible. And I'm going to say, no, not so. But you didn't actually say that yet. You didn't actually say that yet. I'm anticipating you, and I could be wrong, of course.
Well, I'm not prepared to say that right now.
Okay.
So these are in fact cutting edge issues, and that's the theme of this show. So we would, I'm sure Lee would love to have you back to talk more about this, because there's just tons
and other stuff.
Sure.
Because Bob is an extremely smart guy.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Bob.
Yeah,
appreciate. Quite welcome.
And he knows a lot, even. Which those things don't always go together. There are smart guys that don't know very much. There are such people. Anyways, we should go over to Clubhouse, right?
I'm prepared.
Okay, let's do that. And,
see you over there.
All right, so you're going to shut down the activity here, Steve?
Dylan will have to do that.
Thanks, everyone. Did we answer the questions that came up?
No, there's no more.
Okay.
We got them all. Thanks, Dylan.
Thanks. There's Shoshana in the background. Thank you very much for coming, those who are here. And I hope to see you or hear you